A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Akakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, teachings is truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Require back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to go through this chapter, in the book of Ezekiel, because we're living in a time where there's not only a shameful spewing in regards to the filthy practices that are being done by Esau, but we're looking and seeing that a lot of these practices were also done by our people as well, right? So I wanted to read through this, because our people essentially have been what's the word I'm looking for? They've been seduced into these filthy, abominable practices, being around these heathens. And what happens when you get seduced into these different practices? They start to practice those same customs as well, right? So I wanted to read through this because I thought it would be very interesting, because we're kind of getting a glimpse of some of the abominations that the prophet Ezekiel had seen, right? And just like how this is just to show the similarities of some of the abominations that he had seen in his time, and in real time, we're living in a time where, the Lord is pretty much exposing a lot of the abominations that's being done by our people as well, especially those that are higher up and have so-called have a platform in this world, essentially through status and wealth, money, celebrities, politicians. We're starting to see that a lot of their influence, in order to acquire and maintain that influence that they have, they've had to done a lot of abominable practices, within those the fields that they're in to maintain that status, right? So I wanted to read through this in vision in the Ezekiel, and just read a bit of it here, and I just wanted to draw some parallels, and sincerely hoping that this lesson would truly be edifying, right? So this is Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 1 here. And it says, "And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, in the 5th day of the month, that I sat in mine house, and the elders of Judah sat before me. The hand of the Lord, the Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, fell there upon me. Then I beheld, and lo, a likeness of appearance of fire, and the appearance of his loins downward, even downward, fire from his loins, even upward, an appearance of brightness in the color of amber. And he put forth a form of an head and hand, and took me by a lock of mine head, and the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and heaven, and brought me in the visions of the Most High to Jerusalem, to the door of the inner gate that looketh toward the north, where the seat of the image of jealousy, which provoketh to jealousy." So there's something here that was abominable that Ezekiel is seeing that is provoking the Heavenly Father to jealousy. And one of the things was, having a connection to other gods, right? And this was a very, very common thing, back then, right? So here it says in verse 4, "And I beheld the glory of the Most High of Israel was there, according to the vision that I saw in the plain. And then he said unto me, Son of man, lift up thine eyes, and now the way toward the north. So I lift up mine eyes the way toward the north, and behold, northward at the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy in the entry." So there's essentially what you call those things, like I don't want to say it's a platform, but basically, something, it could either be, trinkets, it can be particular, altars that are dedicated towards idol gods, right? And these things are provoking the Heavenly Father to jealousy. And this is a very, very common problem, when you go into, when it comes to our people, they always had a habit of worshiping and even inquiring of, other gods too, right? And we're not even supposed to, do that. We're not supposed to be worshiping these other gods, right? Because the scriptures say that the other gods of the other nations are idols, right? As a matter of fact, I think there says that somewhere in Isaiah. Let me see if I can find that real quick. It's Isaiah 45. Okay, this is Isaiah 45, verse 5, and it says, "For I am the Lord, and there is none else, and there is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me." Right, so there's pretty much, no other gods besides Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, right? And going to these other religions and these other practices, they don't actually have, they actually believe in multiple gods. Just like in the ancient times, it was the same thing, right? Those gods are basically just revamped, they're repolished, they're recycled, and the only thing that's really changing is the empire. So let me just continue on here. This is verse 6, Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 6. And it says, "And he said, Furthermore unto me, Son of man, seest what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel committeth here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary, but turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations. And he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. Then he said unto me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I digged in the wall, behold, a door. And he said unto me, Go in, and behold the wicked abominations that they do here. So when I went in and saw, behold, every form of creeping things, and abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about." So he saw like all these different, idols, the abominable practices our people were doing. Just like in real time, in our time, we're seeing all these filthy, abominable practices that our people have been essentially been doing, for their status. And a lot of these, and it's very interesting. It mentions the ancients. So it mentions the people who were, that had, on the top here, it mentions the elders. So it is mentioning people who had essentially, a certain level of, I don't want to say status, but status is probably the best word to describe, their position, where and they had essentially influence, right? Just like how you have a lot of our people today, they have that same influence, right? Just like they had that influence to influence a lot of our people to take that, that thing that came out, a few years ago during the DEMIC, the demic, right? So during that time, they used their platform to basically influence our people to do things that were abominable, right? The scriptures say that the leaders of the people, they caused them to err. So this is one of the things where you see a lot of the abominable practices, that they do, and they do it to a lot of the younger coming, so-called celebrities, right? For them to actually, make strides within these particular industries, and not just celebrities. It could be sports players, actors, movie stars, so on and so forth. And you see a lot of the abominable practices they have to engage in, right? So just like what Ezekiel's seen, he's digging the hole in the wall and he's seen the abominations thereof, us in real time, even though, yes, the Lord does see everything, we're also getting a glimpse of also the abominations that our people are doing within, these industries. And a lot of it is regarding, children, those different odious works, as Wisdom of Solomon describes, those hateful, abominable, detestful works, that the Lord didn't want us to be doing that, because we're really supposed to be essentially, as the scriptures describe, a noble vine. But we're starting to see, the more as time passes on, there is more shame that's being brought to, not just Esau, right? But we start to see the filthiness and the filthy behaviors of our people as well, right? So let me continue here. Where was I? This is Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 9. And he says, "And he said unto me, Go in, and behold the wicked abominations that they do here. And so I went in and saw, behold, every form of creeping things, and abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel, portrayed upon the wall round about. And there stood them 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel. In the midst of them stood Jezaniah the son of Shaphan, and every man his censer. In his hand a thick cloud of incense went up." And what's very interesting is that the incense and the golden censer was something, these are articles that were used, by, like, for example, it was used essentially from when we were in the wilderness. It was used by Aaron the high priest, because the incense, was supposed to be burned essentially to actually make an atonement, for the people. So just like in a time when we were in the wilderness, when the Lord was bringing forth his judgment upon, those characters, you had Dathan, you had Abiram, and you had Korah, right? So, and then, in order to make an atonement, then Moses, said unto Aaron to go make an atonement, and he burnt, the incense, right? And just like, an incense is very, a strong part of our culture, but to see what people have, what taken something that what our people have, what is considered, something that is that's something sacred, it has been taken for something that is basically to show reverence to another god. Basically, that's the point I'm really trying to solidify right here, right? This is verse 12, and it says, "Then said unto me, Son of man, thou hast seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the chambers of his imagery. For they say, The Lord seeth us not. The Lord has forsaken the earth," right? So they do a lot of these abominations in secret, so, the general public doesn't actually get a glimpse of, or you get a sneak peek, of the abominations of what they're doing. But we're living in a time where essentially knowledge is increasing and has increased, where you start to see there's a lot more essentially you're seeing a lot more exposure of the abominations that's being done via these different platforms, TikTok, Instagram, where there is a lot more shameful spewing, and essentially, our people are not seen in a glorious fashion, as they would have, like maybe going back towards like the 60s and 50s and so on and so forth, where we actually had strong families, and we had a certain sense of wholesomeness. But now we're starting to see that a lot of the degeneracy coming out from the different practices that our people have to engage in, because you didn't, back in those times, like 50s, 60s, you didn't have as much exposure in regards to a lot of the different filthy practices that our people had to engage in within these industries. But now, because there's camera and there's cell phones everywhere, the Lord is essentially has put a glimmer, not even a glimmer, but like a more of light to be shed upon the abominable practices of our people. So let me get this here. It's a real quick one. This is Luke chapter 8 verse 17, and it says, for nothing is secret that should not be made manifest, neither anything hid that should not be known or come abroad. Right? So all these different things that our people engage in, essentially we're starting to see even more in real time, that a lot of their glory that they had is essentially turning to shame. So let's see. Let me continue on here. This is Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 13, and it says, and he said unto me, turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations that they do. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Right? So let me just Google that real quick. So Tammuz here is an ancient Mesopotamian god of shepherds, agriculture, and fertility, embodying the yearly cycle of vegetation, growth, and death. As the consort of Inanna Ishtar, his myth involves a seasonal descent to the underworld, causing summer's dry, barren period. His return marked spring renewal, with worshippers mourning his absence. Right? So let me just see if there's a little bit more here. So it says it's often linked with the Greek god Adonis. So essentially it's just idolatry, right? So you start to see the people, they're paying more attention to the practices of these other gods, right? So and a lot of these things are done in secret. That's why there is essentially a shame. They have to do these things in closed doors, because they don't want the public to know, about the filthiness, that the things that they have to do, right? Let me just get this. This is this is Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 21. And it says here that thou shalt not plant thee a grove of any trees near the altar of the Lord thy power, which thou shalt make thee. Neither thou shalt set up, neither shalt thou set thee up any image which the Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai, thy power hateth, right? So this is something that they're essentially transgressing. Just like how in these times you're starting to see a lot of the filthy practices that our people, when you get more understanding in regards to a lot of the laws and understanding that, we're supposed to be a holy and a separate people, you start to see how filthy and degenerate our people have become, and this is some of the things that in Ezekiel's time that he saw, the filthiness. You saw the people, they were weeping for Tammuz. You saw the set up, the graven images, and and then just like in our time, we're starting to see a lot of the filthy practices that our people do when they are in Hollywood. So for example, you see the children, the boys, they dressed up as women, they have their nails painted, the girls, essentially they're sometimes their body parts are mutilated, or for example, they're turned into boys, so it's essentially you just start to see why the Lord has to get rid of 2/3 of his vineyard, right? So it says here, I guess I'll just read to the end of the chapter. And it says here, verse 15, and he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, the door of the temple of the Lord between the porch and the altar were 25 men, with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, as they worshipped the sun toward the east. And he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? It is a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit such abominations, which they commit here. For they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger, and lo, they put the branch to their nose. Therefore I will also deal in fury. Mine eyes shall not spare, neither shall I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not hear them. Right? So, it shows you that this is one of the reasons the Lord judged us, because we provoked the Lord to anger. And this is something our people don't, question and think about and actually understand, because the mass majority of our nation is essentially a bunch of stubborn children, right? And don't understand the importance of the laws, understand the importance of obedience. They don't understand the importance that the Lord's ways are higher than our ways, right? So, and then when you go into the 9th chapter, then you start to see the essentially a sigh and cry, for the abominations thereof, right? And you start to see that the Lord, he didn't pity the old, the young, the women, the children, right? So there was essentially no pity, because the Lord has used his mouthpiece, the prophets, to be able for our people to actually come back and actually amend their ways and put off those abominable ways. Because we're living in a time where there's a lot of celebrities, and recently there was this a rapper that came across the Israelites. I think they were in Tampa, if I'm not mistaken, where a lot of them actually do know their heritage, right? So as the scriptures say, there is essentially no more cloak for their sin, right? They've had an opportunity, and essentially there was liberty. They have loathed law while they had liberty, like it says in Ezra. But when a place is of repentance was open unto them, they essentially they scorn at it, they despise it. So what is the end result? It's just death by pain, right? So I just thought I would read that to show you some of the parallels between what the prophet Ezekiel saw, their abominations with the hole in the wall, and we're getting a glimpse of that in our time. We're getting our own version of that same same sight, basically, right? So hopefully, this quiz lesson was quick, edifying. Just like to give our praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.